Hey everybody, this is Friday morning, March 19th. I wanted to give you guys a quick tutorial that demonstrates some of the different terrain manipulations that we'll be doing in Photoshop. Um, I like to use these terrain techniques. These are very popular and kind of industry standard within the higher end of cartography. So if you look at publications like New York Times or Washington Post or National Geographic, the cartographers that work at those publications often use a technique similar to this. The students I've had that have made maps that have won awards have used these terrain techniques. If you work for National Geographic or USGS or some of the more like higher end government agencies that do cartography, this is the terrain technique that is most common in Photoshop, using different layers and different masking techniques. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that today. First thing I wanted to point out is I found this. I have a Mac and had the new version of Photoshop automatically updated, and when I opened it I could not find the extension, which terrified me for a moment. And then I did some research and I found out that basically the new version of Photoshop uses a different type of processing than the app is, or that the extension is designed for. And so as the extension is updating to meet the new Photoshop, the way that it uses the memory of the computer, what you need to do if you run into the same thing where you cannot find the extension, is go to your apps folder. And I think this is only on Mac, but if you're on a PC and you're having the same problem, then let me know. Go into your app folder, and if you right click your Photoshop and you go to Get Info, you have to click this little button here that says Open using Rosetta. Close out the program, reopen it, and that will allow you to run the extension. And basically Rosetta is just meaning that you're using an emulator to revert back to the previous version. So it's kind of, it doesn't really do anything functionally that's going to harm the functionality of Photoshop or of the extension. It's just kind of like one of those, the main software and the extension software are not developed at the same rate, I guess. So when one thing updates, and there's a lag for the other one to update. So keep that in mind if you're having issues finding the extension. The second thing that I wanted to point out that I noticed is within the extension here. Let me find my piece. Well, wait, I don't necessarily need to open it, but I did all this at 300, at the 300 DPI export, which is what I typically use for rasters. And I know some people had some issues about using the 300 DPI on the compilation window before, and I found that if you set it to 300 before you bring your data in, that's the most effective way of doing so. So instead of like adding all your data and then changing it from 96 to 300, just set it at 300 first, then bring in your layers. Okay, so just to go through the layers that I have in, oh, here it is. Duh. So yeah, so set this at 300 first, then go ahead and add all these pieces and then sync, and it should be a little bit more smooth than as opposed to if you put all your layers in first at 96 and then you're reprojecting and changing the extent, then that takes more computational processing, and that could be what's causing the lag or the inability for it to reload all these layers when you're going from 96 to 300. So start it at 300 first. If that works, that's great. And if it doesn't, the lab can be done at 96. 300 is preferred for terrain mapping and raster mapping, but 96, it will not look as nice, but it'll look pretty nice. So try it at 300. If your computer's not working with that, use 96. Okay, so let's go ahead and bury these guys in case we need them. If we look at our Photoshop document now, one of the problems with doing this in the morning is the rooster is quite active in the morning, and I don't know if anybody has ever had a rooster before, but they're kind of ridiculous. Okay, anyway, so here's our 5 layers that we're going to be using for our mapping project. We have the fire. I chose the fire perimeter for the fire that was up in near Hoopa this past summer. I believe that was called the Red Salmon Complex. So that's the fire perimeter for that fire. We have our tree cover. This is the National Land Cover Dataset Tree Canopy Layer, which is one of my favorite data layers. And basically this is the National Land Cover Dataset is a 30-meter raster-derived dataset that has multiple classifications of the land cover type. And what the tree canopy layer does is it takes all the deciduous trees, all the evergreen trees, and puts those into one category, and then basically creates like a binary that these pixels are trees, and then the white pixels are not trees. And it's a really cool layer for land cover. And it's a lot less, especially in a forested area. You know, you don't have little specks. If people have worked with land cover data before, it doesn't have little specks of bare soil or little specks of grasslands, and it's, you know, a much cleaner product than the normal land cover data set. Then we have our DEM. This is our digital elevation model. Again, 30-meter digital elevation model. We have our hillshade, which is a derivative of the DEM using the azimuth and the angle of the sun, typically at 315 degrees azimuth, and the angle is 45 degrees in the sky, and that creates a nice illuminated side of the mountains right over here on the north and on the east side, and then a shaded side down here on the south and the west side. And that mimics the sun reflection on the earth. That allows us to see the texture, or like a three-dimensionality to our file, or to our landscape. And then we have the slope, which this one is a little messy, but we're going to clean it up. It's not really a big deal. And the slope, which is kind of hard to see right now because it's kind of a odd file, but this basically just is, each pixel is measured on how steep the terrain is, and we're just going to use this in the end as a texture. So not really a huge piece of our puzzle, but just going to be something that's going to add a little bit of texture at the end. So those are our layers. We have our slope, our hillshade, our DEM, our tree canopy, and our fire layer. I've went through and I've named all these so I can keep track of them. I'm going to go ahead and get my document further set up by going to my hillshade, making a copy, going to, I think I only really need a copy of my hillshade. That's the only one I'm really manipulating. So I can take my hillshade copy and I can lock that. And basically this just, you know, I'm going to do some destructive edits on the hillshade layer, on this layer here. And with this extension, it's super easy. I can just go back to my map compilation window and resync it. You know, in the past when there's been a more long approach to getting between your JS data and your Photoshop data, you know, I always made backup copies of all my layers, just in case some of those destructive edits didn't go as planned. Then I wouldn't have to go back into Photoshop or go back into GIS and re-export. And now that it's so seamless with this, I can just go in and resync. Maybe this step's not actually necessary, but yeah, let's actually we'll just keep that. We'll just have a copy, but maybe it's not necessary. Alright, and then we have our layers. So from here, part 2 will be that manipulation of that terrain that I explain in the steps here. So I'm going to let you guys, you know, do all of kind of these GIS instructions. We've done these enough times that you guys should be good. So video 2, which I'm going to start here in just a second, will work with these Photoshop design instructions. Alright, so let's go ahead and stop this video, and a second one will be up shortly.